Also, why did I want to get into therapy and help people? That's a really good question. And if you go back and hello from Michigan, hi Laura. If you go back and is it Daffodil? Hi, Daffo, Daffo something. Hi. If you go back and look at my content, you'll know that in my 40s, I went through a really, really shitty divorce. Lots and lots of drama. And I decided, I mean, you know, and even before my divorce, there was some stuff. And so I decided ultimately that, hey, Nick, I needed to make all of that pain have value. And to me, that meant helping other people learn from their pain. And so in my 40s, I went back to school. I had to finish my undergrad and I got a master's and opened my private practice, and that's what I do today. Did I ever feel like a narcissist after the abusive relationship? Yes. Well, you know what's interesting is he used to accuse me of being a narcissist. And until I got into grad school, I never really even understood, right? And our therapist, our marriage counselor used to say, oh my God, he's such a narcissist. But I didn't and keep in mind, this was like 2005. I really didn't understand. And so it was really, really interesting to get educated and to develop. I mean, I tell people all the time, since I had so much to work with. By the time I was in grad school, you're writing papers, 2 and 3 papers a week. And every single time I had an opportunity, I conceptualized my own life. And so that 3 years I spent in grad school was a lot like 3 years of very intensive therapy. On top of the fact that I was on this really, I thought, powerful growth journey and spiritual journey. And so kind of it culminated in a really deep understanding of who I had become and in many ways, why I'd lived the life that I had lived. And so, yeah, it was enlightening. It's, and the thing is that when you start to reclaim yourself, if you're with a narcissist, they will use that. Like, you usually have to demand it, right? If you start to reclaim yourself, you're really, I often say it's like struggling to climb up a ladder back into the reality of who you are. And that becomes threatening to a narcissist. So they'll do whatever they have to do. See how egotistical you're being. See what you're doing to us, and so on and so forth. But I was really, really lucky to have a good therapist at the time. And yeah, so more power to us. Cheers to surviving that. Hello, Miss Swankster. Why do adults that had an addict parent often date or marry an addict? Okay, I'm glad you're asking this. Also, power, thank you. Hey, Baking, how are you? So I'm glad you asked this, because I had a conversation like this with a client this afternoon, and I thought there really needs to be a way for me to create some content about this, because so many people put themselves in a scenario. Now, I'm going to tell you that the very best book that you can read about this is The New Codependency by Melody Beattie. So if you were raised by an alcoholic or an addict, there's a really good chance that you grew up and developed a codependent kind of interaction tendency. And really what that means is you're going to keep the peace. You're probably a people pleaser. You probably put your needs aside so that you can meet the needs of other people. because that's what we do when there's an addict or an alcoholic around, right? We just we want everybody to be even keeled, and so we learn to adopt these behaviors that become ultimately unhealthy for us. So I was talking with a client this morning, and her mom was an addict, and she grew up in this environment of complete and total dysfunction. Now, here's the thing. If you become codependent because you grew up in that environment, you're probably not going to know. You're probably not, unless you're like in therapy and you've got a ton of awareness skills, you're probably not going to be aware of a lot of this stuff. And so you become a magnet, literally a magnet, like a beacon for people who need lifted up. And of course, who needs lifted up more than someone who is an addict or has a personality disorder, especially cluster Bs, this sociopath, the borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. You're a beacon, because what you do is you lift people up even when it means negating your own needs or putting yourself down. So growing up like that, you learn that love, that's what love looks like. Or at least you assume that that's what love looks like. This is my mother, my father. Mothers and fathers love children, love their children, and this is what love looks like. And so when an addict, you grow up and an addict enters your world, they're attracted to you because you're either codependent or you're an empath, and you're going to lift them up. And that's comfortable and familiar to you. So their behavior feels like love. But it's not. Their behavior feels normal and comfortable. It feels like home. But of course, it's not comfortable or normal. So that's why that happens a lot. If you are in that position, my advice is always to work on yourself. Work on your self-esteem. Work on your self-confidence. Work on seeing yourself honestly and vulnerably. When you gain strength, you'll be able to see that those relationships are unhealthy. When you gain strength, you'll develop a better understanding of what love truly looks like. And if you're interested in a book that can help with that, there's a book called Real Love by Sharon Salzberg. And it really, I think it's one of the best books I know of that talks about loving yourself. And it goes beyond the self-esteem. She's a Buddhist, and she writes beautifully about the verb love in really probably one of the best ways that I've heard of. So I hope that helps. Each new relationship presents a new part of codependency that you haven't dealt with. Isn't that the truth? Hi, Stephanie. As I do a ton of relationship counseling, probably half of my practice is couples. And what I find overwhelmingly is that relationships are conduits for healing if we allow them to be. You know, in a heartbeat, an intimate relationship where you lie there really, and I don't mean quite literally, but I suppose literally vulnerable and open, they expose those parts of us that have been hurt. And if you're open to seeing that part of yourself, a relationship can be super healing. But obviously, many of us go into relationships unaware, and unintentionally wanting to heal or needing to heal. And so it becomes kind of hurtful. But a relationship often acts like a mirror and forces you to see yourself, which I think is a really good thing. You struggle with this with almost every relationship, and you're very welcome. And in another session this week, somebody was really upset about something that had happened, and their degree of upsetness didn't really seem to match the event. And that's always a symptom to me, or a signal to dive in and dig a little bit deeper. And one of the reasons I love marriage counseling is because all too often counselors will stay up here in the weeds with people. He said, she said, he did this, she did that. I feel, and that's all fine, but these are symptoms of something that's rooted in the psyche of the person, right? As it turned out, the thing that he did triggered a very deep trauma in her. It reminded her of how much pain she felt when something else happened earlier in life. And so this action triggered this pain. And if we're not going to be aware of that, then what happens is we just stay up here and we bicker about this. And if it's a slight infraction, and slight is relative, but if it's a slight infraction, this person's going to be so confused. What is this reaction about? But the pain of that trauma could still be so real and so raw. Far too often people box up pain and they don't process it and cast it and they just box it up. So it kind of stays in a place where it's tender and oozing and sore to the touch. Your marriage counselor said you had to get to the bottom of the shit pile to move on and heal. Yeah. You had to get to the bottom of the pile to move on and heal. Absolutely. Yes. You got to say bye so he knows and take us seriously. Never say bye without love, without I love you. It's interesting. I often talk about my partner, Harlan. So if you're new to my page, Harlan was my probably a spirit guide for me. He was a man who came into my life at a really important time and left my life 10 years later with cancer, but was incredibly instrumental in not just my growth, but in my healing. And one day, I talk about him a lot, which is why I mentioned that. One day, we got in a fight, and I don't, obviously, like many of us, I don't remember what it was about, but I remember he just got up and was going to walk out the door, and I said, "Whoa, Harlan, please don't leave." And he just kind of looked disgusted, and he opened the door, and I sat down and I said, "Isn't it fascinating that the woman who's afraid of being left chose a man whose MO it is to run?" And he just kind of turned around and he looked at me and he goes, "Well, shit, what are we going to do about that?" And so that's what I mean about, I may be losing my voice. That's what I mean about relationships. Having the opportunity to teach you something. Swangster, I've been in a relationship for 5 years. He's a great person except for the addiction. I mean, I think it's really, really important to, you know what I think is that if you haven't already, join Al-Anon so that you have a really good understanding of addiction. Make sure that you're excellent at setting boundaries. And if he's not in recovery, just know that that's going to be super, super hard. And it's going to be important for you to have a support system. So Al-Anon and boundaries. Strong, strong recommendations. Let's see, your husband told you he was only attracted to thin women. Oh my gosh. Tired. I get on a bandwagon, really a bandwagon, when I hear people, and often it's men, describing the physical shape that they require their women to be. My instinct is to say, get the F over yourself. Get the hell away from me. Because that is so controlling. It is so narcissistic. And even if he's not a narcissist, that statement is narcissistic. Like, who the hell do you think you are? You better look like, I don't know, whoever is attractive to you. I'm thinking of Keanu Reeves or, God, my brain doesn't work sometimes by Thursday night. Anyway, I'm sorry you had to go through that. My ex-husband also told me that he would leave me if I got fat. So I spent a decade, literally 10 years of my life, stressed and anxious about the shape of my body. And that is no way to live. Can somebody have, hello Lauren, can someone have narcissistic traits without being a narcissist? Absolutely. Yes, yes, and triple yes. I honestly think that the term narcissist is a little overused, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that lots and lots of people, and some articles have even suggested that everybody's a little bit narcissistic. But obviously, narcissistic personality disorder requires a certain set of characteristics or criteria in order for diagnoses. People who have borderline personality disorder are often also exhibit strong narcissistic tendencies. As a matter of fact, there's several, certainly sociopath are often comorbid for narcissism or NPD. Almost anybody, I would go out on a limb and I would say almost anybody who's a really great salesman demonstrates some narcissistic tendencies, because I think it's kind of required. I think I read a statistic in Fortune magazine a couple of years ago when narcissism was still or first hitting the headlines, that somewhere like 80% of our nation's leaders and corporate executives might qualify for NPD. And I don't know how true that statistic is, but I certainly think up to 80% of them probably demonstrate narcissistic tendencies, because there's a certain element of climbing the corporate ladder promotes, I'm going to step over you. Adam Grant, who's a psychologist at Penn, is really one of the first hyper successful people to talk about inclusivity and empathy, and in a way that says it needs to be a collective energy. And so I think that ideology might be starting to change, and some people would argue probably that it's, the old white men have to die, the misogynistic people need to just be eliminated in order for narcissism to disappear. I'm sure that's pretty controversial. But having said that, the answer to your question in short is absolutely. Narcissistic tendencies are prevalent in lots of areas for lots of reasons. Hello, Nellie. I've had failed relationships with abusive men, physically and emotionally. You're 41. Nellie, I would ask you what your upbringing was, right? Were you raised in, and you don't have to answer here, but I would ask you, were you raised in an abusive environment? Is that how you define love? Have you ever challenged your idea of what love actually is? Because I'm going to tell you, love is not abusive. Love is kind, love is patient, love is considerate, love is empathetic. And so if you're in a relationship, you or anybody else, I'm talking to all of TikTok land of the 30 people that are on here, if you're in a relationship that is not those things, most of the time, like 99% of the time, then that's not love. And I would challenge that you have a distorted perception of what love really looks like. And it's unfortunate because if we grew up in an environment where love really wasn't healthy, then our only comparison is this unhealthy love where we grew up, or this really unattainable or kind of fantastical definition of love that we see in television and movies. So really challenge yourself to say, or to think about, how do I see love? Like, what does love mean to me? And it can be hard, really hard to change that. It has to be like an intentional, conscious effort when you've been raised in an environment where there was toxic love, because you have to totally shift your understanding of what it looks like and feels like to literally be loved by somebody. My ex-husband used to say to me all the time, "But I love you." And I'm like, but this isn't love. This isn't love. If you love someone, you're going to keep your promises. If you love someone, you're not going to betray them intentionally over and over again. So at least in my mind, that was my definition of love. And it took me a long time to get up enough courage to say, I'm not willing to settle for someone else's definition of love. If you think love is toxic, or you think love looks like this, and it hurts me, love's not supposed to hurt. One of the only blog posts that I ever wrote that went viral was, "Love does not hurt." Love is not supposed to hurt. That was years ago. But seriously, love is not supposed to hurt. Love is supposed to feel good. Now, losing love, like when somebody changes their mind or when they die, that hurts. Of course, that hurts. But when somebody says, "I love you," they're not supposed to be betraying you simultaneously, or hitting you, or calling you, disparaging you. That's not love. It's not love. And I think we really need, when I say we, I mean just as a society, we need to really challenge people's understanding of love so that we can create more love in our environments, in our families. We can be more attentive to raising children in a loving loving home. I watched somebody in a store this week turn around, their kids were fighting, and he said, I am going to smack your ass if you don't stop it. Before I was a therapist, I probably would have said something similar to that because I grew up in a family where spanking was allowed. But what I know today is that that's not a loving behavior. Hitting someone is not a loving behavior. And I know God knows, there's lots and lots of controversy over corporal punishment. But at the end of the day, hitting someone in anger is not a loving behavior. Period. You know, what kind of therapist am I? I am a mental health therapist, if that's what you're asking, with a focus on personal growth and marriage counseling or couples counseling. Do I have tips for dealing with a family member with narcissistic tendencies? Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. You know, the thing about narcissists and narcissistic tendencies in general is this idea that they need to be lifted up pretty consistently. And so, Lauren, if you have a specific question, that might be easier for me because narcissistic tendencies take a lot of different shapes. But probably the most consistent is that somebody needs to be lifted up at your expense. So, for example, you want to share something and they're like, yeah, but listen to my day. Like, let me tell you about mine. In which case, I think asking for your needs is super important, right? Making sure that you say, I want to know about your day, but I need validation for what I just shared. Is that something that you can give me? Because that didn't feel very good to just get kind of dismissed or to have the attention shifted, right? I'd like you to, let's acknowledge what I said first and we'll get to you. I want to lift you up too. Something like that. USMC, so something, I'll say USMC. Your feelings do matter. Don't let anybody tell you your feelings don't matter. My post today was about minimizing feelings. Stop letting people minimize your feelings. I can't tell you how many clients sit in my office, sit on my couch, have sat in front of me on the phone or virtually saying, well, I know it's okay. We don't have to talk about it. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have to talk about it? Well, I know it doesn't really matter. Yes, it does. Stop dismissing your feelings. Stop allowing other people to dismiss your feelings. What you feel, even, if I get a paper cut, which by the way, I was cutting chicken yesterday and I wasn't really paying that close of attention. I was trying to cut a chicken breast and I literally had my finger there and pulled the knife across my finger. And as I did it, I'm like, oh shit, that's gonna hurt. It's fine. I don't, it's closing up nicely, but it was literally like there was the chicken and then there was my finger and that hurt. It hurt. There was pain. And if I don't allow myself to acknowledge that it hurts, if I say, oh my God, Leslyn, there are people getting open heart surgery right now. Your finger is fine. Well, that's true. But before I acknowledge everybody else's pain, I have to acknowledge and process my pain. And once I do that, then I can say, in comparison to an open heart surgery or a knee replacement or whatever, my finger is going to be fine. What can I do for you? And then I turn my attention to the other pain. But first and foremost, your pain is valid, and you have to demand that it be, first of all, from yourself, that it be acknowledged. And then, you know what? This is important to me. This hurts me now, here. I want to focus on that, and then we can talk about whatever the case may be.
So you got any suggestions for somebody that's going through depression?
So, I want to make sure everybody understands, everybody on my live, it's important to always understand that any advice that I give is general, right? Since I'm not licensed in your state, I can't give you individualized suggestions, but let's talk generally speaking.
Right.
I take the approach that there's a couple of different types of depression. This is the way I explain it. One type of depression is situational, right? So I have a client who's had a really hellacious year. Every time she turns around, there's something else happening, right? Her husband lost her job. Her daughter's been sick.
Hold on. Excuse me real quick. Let me cut you off. My type of depression is everything can be going right in the world. I could hit the lottery today and want to die tomorrow. It's just random. Nothing goes wrong. Everything's good. And I wake up depressed. I don't know.
So that kind of depression, I think, is more chemically oriented, right? So I think it would be really important to make sure that you have a check-in with a psychiatrist regularly, that you're taking meds. Sometimes our brain chemistry cannot naturally balance itself off, and we need the extra pharmacological support that antidepressants give us. And in order to get an antidepressant or the kind of brain balanced medicines that will fix that, we need to work with a psychiatrist, because psychiatrists are medical doctors that specialize in brain chemistry.
Okay, well, thank you for your advice. I appreciate you. I wish you the best. Hope you have a good Christmas.
Ooh, what's the difference between codependent and empathetic? I think it's the intent. So this probably is not a textbook answer. This is Leslyn's answer. You know what? Before I go on, somebody gave me the sweetest compliment the other day, and I just thought I'd share it with you because it tickled my fancy. It's a college student I work with, and she has shared with her friends that her therapist is on TikTok, so many of her friends follow me. And one of her friends came in and said, you know what I've decided? I've decided that it's Live, Laugh, Love, Leslyn. And I thought that was super sweet. So I'm sharing. So the difference what made me think about that is that this is a Leslynism, not necessarily a textbook response, okay? But it's, to the best of my understanding, in a way to simply explain that, what would Brett say? A codependent person gives in order to be loved, be accepted, be valued, right? A codependent person is going to sacrifice in almost like a trade for recognition or value. Whereas empathy is a healthy empathy, and maybe, so just empathetic, or did you mean empath in particular? And I'll just use the word empath. An empath doesn't really have motivation for because an empath is more about just, I'm somebody who absorbs, Or, yeah, thank you. An empath is just taking in the feelings and the energy of the people around them. An empath, when in responding to that, and many codependents are empaths, but not all. So it's really in the response, and then it's in the motivation of the response. So I hope that makes sense. Codependents are almost always trying the baseline, the root energy is, can I get acknowledgement for existing? Not even like up here level acknowledgement, but will you acknowledge me? Will you love me? Will you desire me? Will you see me? Kind of thing. What if that's the only way you can get love? And there you go. Hello, Rocky's World. That's a name near and dear to my heart. Well, see, that's just it, Betty. Yeah. That's just it. Is that that's what codependency kind of. Hello, Keisha. How are you? That's what codependency is based on, right? That's our belief. We grow up to be codependent adults because we're somewhat taught that the only way to be loved is to give and to self-sacrifice. The problem is we're taught that because that's not love. We're taught that by unhealthy people. And at some point, oh no, USMC. At some point, that boundary means that what I'm not going to be getting is the unhealthy love. And I talked about this a little bit earlier tonight. It's this idea that if I say no to you, then you're not going to love me and I'll be left out here all alone. But that's not true. Well, I mean, temporarily it might be true, but ultimately, if you keep up some of that work, then people who are healthy will love you. All right. Hi, Keisha. Does a therapist go to therapy? Abso-freaking-lutely. Not all the time necessarily, but I think every good therapist has a therapist that we check in with from time to time. And I actually had something come up with a client a few weeks ago that I got super insecure with. I mean, I had the session and I was me and I did the session and then I came home and it came home with me and I called and had a session with my therapist because I'm like, I'm just not really sure how I feel about this. And sometimes it's really just about, like it is with everybody, it's just processing. You know, from time to time, I've had personal things come up. I was in supervision when Harlan got sick. Thank God. And supervision can be about your clients or it can be about you, whatever it is that you need, however you need support. And by supervision, what I mean is, in order to get licensed, every state requires some number of postgraduate supervised hours. So in Pennsylvania, it was 3,000. So the first 3,000 hours that I practiced as a therapist, I had to have supervision or I had to meet with a colleague just to work through your client sessions, conceptualizations, to address things that come up for you as a result of clients or in your life, for whatever. And because I started off in private practice, with one client, it took me almost 5 years to finish my supervision. So for that 5 years, I was seeing somebody pretty regularly. That was my supervisory person, but I had another person that was more of a personal therapist that has since become kind of my go-to individual. It has to be hard to change to something that is just you. Interestingly, USMC, it was not hard. I mean, in context of tonight's conversation, remember that I spent many years pretty codependent, which meant that up until the time when I decided to become a therapist and started down that educational path, my therapist before that had told me I was codependent. I didn't have a good understanding of what that meant. I was married to an alcoholic who was a narcissist, and I think she was really using it like, wake up, chick. Look at what you're doing. Look at what you're allowing in your life. Why are you allowing this? Oh, because my mom left when I was 12. My dad started drinking, and I took care of my siblings, and I just have to take care of people. That's what I do. But it really still took going to grad school and conceptualizing myself around every corner before I had a better understanding of who I was and why I did what I do. And because that was such a powerful space to be, that's where I concentrate my work with clients, is who are you? Why are you the way you are? And what do you do with who you are? It's so incredibly informational. And I focus that, not because it's all bad, right? The goal isn't to change everything about yourself. The goal is to know yourself so well that you're able to shift and tweak the things that don't work in your life, right? That's it. It's kind of that simple, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to have all these negative connotations to go along with it. It's really about understanding, accepting, and tweaking. I'm still a control freak. But today I manage it. When I say I want to control something, I just acknowledge it. I own it. I say I want to control that. Whew, that is not mine to control. And I'm much, 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 much better at letting go and stepping back than I ever was my whole life. I see unhealthy people now. I see people who don't recognize boundaries. I never used to. In my 20s and 30s, I constantly allowed myself to be in positions where people took whatever it was that I had to offer, and I gave it to them, because I wasn't aware that I was draining myself. Now, when I take care of myself, right? I set limits. When I was a new therapist, if you wanted to see me Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, I said, okay. If you wanted to see me at 9:30 on Monday night, I said, okay. And I only lived about 5 miles away from my office, but I would drive up there 3 times a day. And then my supervisor would say, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, that's what they needed. And so we had to spend some time really paying attention to how that tendency for me to people please infiltrated my practice, my private practice. And then it was like this light bulb that went, oh, I can create a boundary, and my clients will, they'll see me as a professional businesswoman, and some of them won't like me. And then I had probably had 4 therapy sessions just about that. because at the root of the codependency is this idea that you just want to be liked, you just want to be loved, I want to be picked, right? So then I moved through that, and so there's just this persistent moving and discovery and journeying. And maybe the best or the most liberating part of the whole thing was learning how to own it, learning how not to be ashamed of those parts of you that are less than desirable according to your brain, or less than perfect, again, according to your brain, because so many people pleasers are perfectionists. Learning how to own it and get okay with, hey, I'm not perfect. Hey, I'm sorry I disappointed you. I know I'm going to disappoint you. Hey, we're not a good fit. You don't like me? Okay. There's lots of different kind of people out there. One day I realized, like this, again, like an aha moment. I was so dependent on all of these people liking me, but they didn't even know me. Like how could I expect them to like me? Why would I value whether or not they liked me if they didn't even know me? And if you know me and you don't like me, okay, that might sting a little. But if you don't know me and you don't like me, what does that even mean? And that was a big aha moment for me. So people who casually knew me but didn't like me, all of a sudden it was a non-event because how much value, how real is that? I guess is what I'm trying to say. How real is that? And then I understood that as a therapist, liking me and there not being a good fit could be two completely different things. So that was pretty helpful when helping others in therapy. Yes, narcissists have boundaries. Why can't we? Actually, narcissists do not have boundaries. They really do not. Yeah, I'm going to say maybe the more exact thing to say is narcissists have no perception of boundaries, right? They don't honor boundaries. They typically do not set boundaries. What narcissists do is they establish, see, in order to have a boundary, you have to see other people. And I'm going to think about this for a minute, because I don't think of narcissists as even having boundaries. In fact, narcissists are known for violating boundaries or not even seeing them, right? Not acknowledging them in any way, shape, or form. And I think if you're not acknowledging them, you're really not setting them. I think in many ways a narcissist just simply lays claim to whatever they want, and that might look and feel a little bit like a boundary. But I don't think it's literally something that's an intentional boundary being set by somebody who's a narcissist. I'd be open to having a discussion about that with somebody. So your narcissist's father had boundaries for you. I would be interested to kind of digest that a little bit for themselves. Yeah. So, okay, I mean, I'm open to that. I think I'd have to digest that a little bit and see it in play. And we might be using the word boundary a little bit differently. So, yeah, I don't know everything, I promise. And I'm always open to thinking about something differently. So cheers to that. So much love, you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. I wish you well, and I'll see you Monday night. Goodbye.